Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We're digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave, and we'd love to hear where you think we got it right and where you think we don't know what we're talking about. You can do that on Rumble or on our website, the unsilentpodcast.com, or various social media channels. But by all means, reach out and tell us what you think. So, Brian, what's happening?
Well, today we exceeded our normal show prep time, which normally we commit about 37 seconds. And today I think we went like a full 2 minutes.
We did.
And I joke about that, but I think it's important to explain to people why I do it that way. And I don't know, you can give your own perspective as well. Part of what I think what we're trying to do here is capture the mood of what's going on in this era we're in, as people undoubtedly are going to look back 50 years or 70 years from now and say, what the hell are those people thinking? And I don't think we can do that if we script it out and we plan our talking points and things like that. And like, I'm going to say this and you say that, and then we'll do. So I'm fully aware that a lot of things we say will be proven wrong, or maybe our first take is not the right one. And I don't want people to think that it's because we don't care. It's because I want it to be authentic and to reflect what our gut reaction is to a thing, at least as much as the factual data. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
at least that's my perspective.
No, and that's the way I see it too. Our stated purpose here is to reflect the mood, and the mood is more of a reaction in real time than a specific analysis. I mean, we do our own analysis in the process of this, but it's not like a scripted analysis and with 14 talking points and subpoints, et cetera. It's just kind of.
I don't want to do a point counterpoint CNN version from 2002. That's not what I'm looking to do.
Totally agree. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, that being said, a couple things stood out to me this week. One was it's a chart, and largely what we do is audio, so I'm not going to bother sharing the chart, but showing house affordability, home price affordability is the name of the chart, and it's there's a range of like 60 on the low end of the scale and up to 300. The lowest point in history was around 1920, meaning houses were the most affordable around 1920. And they were on this index, it was like an 89.7. That looks like is the low point over this goes back to 1890 or so. And then during the Depression, it kind of surprised me that housing was relatively affordable compared to, let's say, 1890 to 1910. It was relatively unaffordable compared to the 20s through the 40s. And then post-World War II, big spike up to around 150, kind of hovered around 150, 160, creeping up to around 175 around 1990, right? Mm-hmm. And it fell back down to 150 again around 1995, it looks like. And then it just shoots straight up to 266 in 2006. And then, of course, plummets down to about 180 in 2010. Mm-hmm. And now we're at about 300.
Yeah.
So affordable was 89. Average looks to be about 150. The peak in 06 before the housing crisis bubble was 266, fell back down to about 180, and now we're at 300. So the reason I thought that's interesting is it's just another one of those indicators that things are broken. I think that part of the romanticized version of the American dream and the real version of the American dream is getting to own your own home.
Sure.
And increasingly, that's not a realistic goal for people.
Right.
Specifically, it's not a realistic goal for young people. I have a son, I have a couple sons that are at the age, they're mid-20s, where they're like, okay, I got my career started, I got my education done. Now it's time to start thinking about, having a family and having my own place and things like that. And I don't know that's realistically in the cards. I mean, I honestly don't like it.
Yeah.
You either have to lower your standards so much to get a place you can afford and cross your fingers and hope there isn't a housing crisis or bubble and plan to spend 10 years incrementally improving that thing. Or you have to way overextend yourself and hope you can survive for a few years to make it until your income catches up with the cost of the house. All those are like precarious places to be. And that's assuming you can even get your foot in the door. Like the scale has changed. This graph just is proof that my gut feeling on that is not wrong. And
Oh yeah.
Laments from young people about how this is all stacked in boomers' favor. It's not just talking points. There's real
No,
math behind this.
no,
And I
it's
think
not
that's one
just
of the
talking.
things that Neil Strauss or Neil Howe and Bill Strauss talk about the fourth turning is the cards are the deck is stacked in the favor of the boomers.
Yeah.
They get all the benefit post World War II, and there has to be a reshuffling of the deck to make it so that young people can have a life that they've been told that they're supposed to have.
Yeah, and it's as you said, it's the most basic thing to measure the sort of financial and even societal success of a person or a couple is, their ability to afford a house and make it their own, and accumulate lots of stuff they don't need. All the stuff that attends to home ownership. I was looking at a house listing that one of my daughters shared with me the other day, and the house was selling. It's in Texas, so their property tax, their house costs are a little bit lower. Their property taxes are a little bit higher. The house was 1,350 square feet on about a quarter acre or something like that, or maybe less than that, maybe just an eighth acre, pretty basic residential home. 320,000. And I was reflecting on that because the house that I bought in 2000 uh, sold for the same price, 320,000. And it was three times that size on 10 acres in rural Washington. And
Yeah.
so it's like, and I looked at that and I told her, I said, I know things have changed, but my gosh, I cannot, I mean, you have to have a very substantial income to be able to afford that. I mean, I understand that some of the banks are changing. They're looking at 40-year mortgages. Some of the banks are looking at changing debt to income ratios because how else are you going to sell a house? And that just so you say, oh, that I remember there was this. I'll share this one with you. There's an old Mad Magazine. Cartoon back in like the 70s or something. It's this woman sitting at her kitchen table, and she said, well, we finally made it. And she's looking across the table at her husband. I've always dreamed my entire life of owning $100,000 house, and now I finally do. And then it zooms out, and it's a little tiny rambler, in a residential neighborhood. And that was considered like, whoa, that's,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And it does, I think once you put the screws to people, to the economy, to such an extent that they can't realistically see how their career is going to provide them the house, the most basic thing, house, car, all that. Then you're really removing hope from the
Right.
society, and that's a precarious place to be. It's a very dangerous place to be because we remove hope in our institutions. We remove the hope in our own ability to achieve the life goals that we've got, and then we wonder why the mood of society has soured so much.
Yeah. It does feel like one of the undercurrents of our particular fourth turning and crisis era. This is probably, if I took some time to think about how they wrote about it in the book Pendulum or the book Fourth Turning and things like that, they probably spell this out to a great degree. But there's an unfairness and lack of equality in ability to achieve an outcome, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things I saw, a meme I saw a couple weeks ago, I didn't think to save it because it was way before I saw this thing, it showed uh a couple like 65, 70 years old standing on a balcony of like a flat in like Paris or something like that. It was like, here, boomers, and they each had a champagne flute and they were toasting, and they're boomers celebrating selling their flat for $6.7 million that they bought for 30,000 pounds and or 30,000 francs or whatever it was in 1958 or something like that.
Yeah.
And there is this stark difference in people who rode the economic wave up post World War II and
Yeah.
bought a house for $25,000 and then sold that and bought a house for $75,000 and sold that and bought a house for $200,000, that then they could later sell that $200,000 house for $600,000
Right.
and take that $400,000 and go pay cash for a really, really nice place or a
Yeah.
downsize or whatever. That modality driving up the prices, and also coupled with people buying houses, kind of like we were talking about the stock market a couple weeks ago, people buying stocks not on the value of the company, but on their speculation as to how much that price would increase of the value, the stock price.
Right.
Same thing is happening for housing. People buy a house maybe that they don't need. They buy a $600,000 house instead of a $400,000 house because they think, well, when the price goes up, the same percentage, I'll get more dollars in return on the $600,000 house. Well, that drives up the price even further.
Right.
And then you look at the Airbnbs and all these things are driving up the prices. Well, young people are in a situation where they don't even have the entry fee into the game.
Yeah.
And so that is going to feed unrest and hopelessness leads to revolution and all kinds of not very fun things. But what choice do they have? I mean, the status quo ain't going to work for them. Like, they have to do something. And, a lot of times you and I talk about like politics and foreign affairs and things like that. But I don't think we can diminish the economics of what's driving the crisis and the generations of who's in favor and who this system is working for, aka the boomers, and who it's not working for, aka the millennials and Gen Z.
Right.
That has to be sorted out. We just can't ignore it.
Yeah, because I do think that if you base your formula, if young people base their formula on the boomer or Gen X formula, then they think, well, this is how it worked before, so this is how it's going to work now. Then whether you're talking about the stock market, whether you're talking about buying a house or career trajectory, whatever it happens to be, when that doesn't happen and you become even more disillusioned with a system that has, failed you on the political level, has failed you on an institutional level, has failed you on every economic level, this last level of your own life and the expectations you had for it, when that collapses, then, I mean, that could be the economic tipping point that just turns everything upside down and leads us into an economic crisis that we haven't seen since the 1920s.
Yeah. The other thing I saved for this week is this is an ex post from Michael Schellenberger, who's, in my opinion, turned out to be one of a handful, I would say, honestly, of like real journalists, like objective journalists. Like he was, I think his own account is he was a leftist, progressive for sure, if not a leftist, certainly on the left side of the aisle. And now he's hated by those people because he kind of, I wouldn't say he jumped parties, but he stayed true to his
principles,
principles.
Yeah.
And, I think he would say, like the party shifted around him and he stayed in place, kind of like you and I talk about, right?
Yeah.
I'm putting words in his mouth. That's not fair, but that's kind of my characterization of who he is. I believe him to be a really objective person.
Sure.
He doesn't follow party lines. I believe he calls balls and strikes as well as anybody does, not adhering to party propaganda for either side. Right.
Yep.
The reason I preface this with that is because what he posts here is pretty jarring. He wrote a piece for, it looks like Public. I don't know if it's Public Magazine. I don't know what the platform is, or the whatever it's, if it's an e-magazine, I don't know what it is. It's not his Substack, but it says here that the Biden administration labeled opponents of the COVID mandates as, quote, domestic violent extremists. I thought, wow, I mean, I kind of had an inkling of that, but to see that they actually had like a legitimate government label for it that has the weight of having that legitimate government label behind it, that was just jarring to me to see that kind of intense label would be put on people who just didn't want to be forced into doing things that were unproven. That just seems wild to me. That again, it's one of those things that they wouldn't do that. And then we kind of had a feeling they were doing that, but now we have proof that they did that. Yeah. It's like, wow, that is just crazy that our government, who we were brought up to believe is the best one out there, and I still say it probably is, would do that to their own people.
It's basically saying, if you don't go along with us, you're a terrorist. I mean, that's kind of the violent extremist. That's another word for saying terrorist, domestic or otherwise.
Yeah.
So
or at least potential terrorists for
well,
sure.
but terrorists in waiting. You've been recruited by those crazy
Yeah,
people that don't want to shut down the schools and their businesses, because who knows? It might go from that to carrying AK-47s down Main Street. I mean, it's
right.
just yeah.
So again, to kind of put a cartoonish slant on this, like, so people who would say that closing a restaurant because it's indoor, except if they put tents up so you could have outdoor seating that replicated indoor seating, people who said that seems kind of crazy to me, I don't want to go along with that, and didn't want to have vaccine passports and stuff like that, people said, like, that kind of sounds like show me your papers,
Right.
I don't want to go along with that. Those people were the ones deemed domestic violent extremists.
Right. And now, after everything is passed and we see that, it's even hard to believe now. I mean, it's something that when you look historically, you think, did that really happen, or am I just imagining that? Is that is that actually?
Yeah.
But given that kind of reporting, and we see, yes, this is what actually happened. The question comes to mind for me is, okay, well, why? Why did they do that? So the couple options pop to mind. One of them is like, it's the only way we can control these people and get them to do what's good for them by taking the vaccine and standing the scientifically established 6 feet away from other people. I say that
Yeah.
with air quotes around it, because it was
Yeah.
something that Fauci made up, sitting at the kitchen table drinking a coffee, whatever.
Yeah.
Or so is that the reason, or is it more nefarious? And the reason being, well, let's see, if we spin this way, if we say that this is who they are and we're going to take appropriate action like this because they're disobeying a government mandate, is that more just kind of a like testing out how far we can go with the rhetoric to force people into compliance with how we want things done? Or is it a combination of both? I mean, it could even be, I mean, it depends on who you
second
ask.
one requires a level of forethought that I'm not sure I'm willing to give them credit for being able to have.
Sure, no, I agree.
I think it's really as simple as, we don't want people telling us what to do. We're in charge.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It could very well be, and the fundamental reason I don't believe in most conspiracy theories, there's some obviously that we kind of have to say, well, that turned out to be exactly like the people who were banned said it was.
Yeah.
But the reason I don't believe in most conspiracy theories is because, it takes too much forethought, too much coordination, all of that to make it happen, and people are too fickle to make large scale conspiracies happen. Except when they do. So,
What they do, right?
except when they do. So in this case, I think a combination of incompetence and sort of a malevolent disregard for the basic rights of an American citizen are the things that drove all of that. And again, you wouldn't have thought it could happen here, but it did.
Yeah, it reminds me of, there was an exchange between Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, and Adam Carolla, who has a very successful podcast. He's a comedian and has also been kind of a staunch opponent to a lot of this stuff. Gavin Newsom, I think I'm getting this right. Gavin Newsom, I think, called into a podcast where Adam Carolla was like on a panel or like was a guest or something like that. And Adam Carolla asked Governor Newsom, why'd you shut down the schools? And Newsom's answer was something like, well, we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know the severity. We didn't. And Adam Carolla says, right. So why'd you close down the schools? Right.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's a if that is the case, if that is indeed true, or to actually, I should say it this way, to the extent that that is true, not to the extent that it was influenced by teachers unions or influenced by other factors. It still brings up the question of leadership and of free choice, and of, do we have a controlled society, or do we have a society where people can decide to what measures to take to prevent it? And
how much rights do the citizens have against government overreach? And the answer in that case was, in California and Washington and Oregon and many other states, the answer was not much.
Very little. Yeah, very little.
When push came to shove, they put their foot down and required people to obey or be labeled this domestic violent extremist term.
Yeah,
with all the complications and consequences that come with that.
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, you
So
could lose your
anyhow,
job, lose your freedom. I mean, yeah. Well,
yeah.
so here's a hypothetical. Let's say that.
Well, and don't forget, lose your status in society.
Oh yeah,
Like these people were completely pariahs. Like they were mocked by people who had fancy titles and fancy degrees and fancy a lot of influence, both in the government, out of the government. They were humiliated, and
yeah,
many of them lost their livelihoods, like lost very prestigious jobs and high paying and income jobs and stuff like that. Um, they lost it all. Not
yeah.
not just did they lose their ability to choose whether or not to wear a mask. That was like the least of the things, honestly, for many of
Right.
these people.
And now that that's happened, and now that a number of successful lawsuits have been run against entities that did force that on us, where people lost their jobs or in some way were impacted by what we know was not true now. I mean,
Yeah,
a lot of us said it wasn't true back then, and a lot of us
yeah,
said you can't take draconian measures unless you have evidence, actual evidence, not the
yeah,
science TM. Don't contradict me because I am
yeah.
the
I
science.
am the science. Yeah, yeah.
You know? But now that that's all happened, is that playbook out the door if COVID-2 happened, or if whatever, or would they try the exact same thing again, and would it be successful?
Well, of course, there's no way I could know, but my
Yeah.
my gut tells me it will play out largely the same way it did, and both sides will be even more emboldened to draw their lines in the sand.
Right. And that yeah, that's what I would think as well. And as a result of that, again, another potential tipping point.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
the
for
thing
sure.
about the fourth turning piece is when I talk to people about, the cycles and the generations and the turnings and such, it's like, well, what is going to be the thing? No, 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 it's not going to be the thing. I mean, sure, there will be a tipping point event of
Yeah,
some sort, but it could very well be any one of a dozen things that are all going wrong all simultaneously,
yeah,
whether it's foreign or whether it's domestic, whether it's social, whether it's government overreach, whether it's red versus blue, whether, you pick your poison. Everything collapsing at once is a telltale sign of a fourth turning. And
yeah.
then it's just a matter of, well, which one of the things that are vying for the final event to tip us over the edge, which of those things is most likely to happen? And we won't know, I
Yeah.
think, until it actually does happen. But
Oh, and I think one of the things we learned around the election, I can't remember, was it a raccoon or a squirrel? Well, it was a squirrel, wasn't it? There was a squirrel that the state of New York like confiscated from the people, and you and I were
oh
talking
yeah,
about
yeah,
how
yeah, yes,
there was many
the
factors
squirrel.
to Trump
It was
winning, and you
both.
and I specifically said what?
It was both. There was a raccoon and a squirrel. They were both.
Okay, so the squirrel though was the one that got all the notoriety. The raccoon was kind of a secondary
He
player,
was
but
a
the
secondary.
squirrel
Yes.
the squirrel, for whatever reason, I don't know why, had demanded an emotional entanglement from people that drove them to speak, to post, to act, to
Yep.
vent, to whatever. There's no way a year ago you and I could have said, well, if anybody confiscates an animal from somebody's house, that's going to be the thing that really
Right.
gets a lot of attention right before the election.
Right.
And but you and I specifically said after the election that had as much weight as other things,
Yeah.
like Trump getting shot in Butler. Like you and I
Yep.
said, like you can't diminish the squirrel. I can't remember the squirrel's name. That makes me. I
Yeah,
can't
it's
remember the name.
something that ended in Y because it was a cute
Yeah,
name.
yeah,
I
like
can't
Rocky
remember
the squirrel or whatever it was. But
something.
there's no way we could have predicted that. It just took off, and it
Yeah.
just grabbed people's heartstrings or emotions or whatever, and drove them to speak out. Who knows why that was? But it was a thing.
Well, and the only way that's possible is if people's nerves and kind of attitudes are raw to begin with. I mean, if it was
Yeah,
just, because say that happened in 2010, right? Or something, 2012. Let's go for another election year. Say it happened in
or
2012.
2016 when Trump won that election.
Or even 2016, even as recently as 2016. Say it happened then. Most people would look at that and say, well, this was just an overzealous, person that hates squirrels or something like that. They wouldn't have given it more societal import than it did, or as much as it did this time. But the fact that everybody is raw on everything, I mean, the whole world is raw on everything. The littlest things, a pet squirrel that wore a little hat. I remember he had this little hat that was
It
super
was
cute.
Peanut the squirrel.
Peanut, yes. Yeah, and Peanut had a friend in that guy's house that was a raccoon because this guy rescued him and all of that. So the in the past, the same events that happen now in the past wouldn't have had the same impact, but because of the mood of the age that we're in, it has an exaggerated impact and doesn't move. That's why things that happen in a fourth turning that cause somebody to go to war wouldn't in a non-fourth turning time, in a third turning or second turning time. Yeah, well, this happened as an act of terrorism. It sucks. We're going to go find the people, bring them to justice, into that. But now it's different.
Yeah. So anyhow, like you were saying, like when you talk to people about the fourth turning, they're always wanting to know, like, what's your opinion of what the trigger is going to be?
Right.
None of us know what the trigger is going to be.
No.
We'll know after the fact, but we won't know the Archduke Ferdinand. Yeah. We won't know that until after it happened.
Yeah.
We just know there's going to be a thing that takes off and lights up the tribes,
right?
And they're both gonna dig in and dig their heels in, and like that's gonna be the thing. Who knows what it's gonna be? But there's all these little embers. Again, we're talking economic stuff, we're talking social stuff, we're talking geopolitical stuff, we're talking institutional stuff, we're talking national security. Like there's no shortage of potentials.
Well, and this is the reason for Kenny G that it's important, and for any future generations going through any of the turnings, it's important for them to look at the mood more than the individual event. So it's like, is there going to be a foreign attack on American soil like Pearl Harbor? Yeah, maybe not. Is there going to be a great societal question like slavery? Yeah, maybe not. Is there going? I mean, there's probably not going to be rebellion against the King of England again because that's kind of settled. But you just don't know. All of those things happen in times where the general waters were unsettled. Because if they would have happened, if the King of England raises the prices on tea taxes by a penny, or does something with rum or whatever in a non-fourth turning time, people are grouchy about it at the local public house, but they don't confiscate a ship and throw everything into the harbor. It's just this, and so I think that's again another way, if we project forward to the future, for Kenny G to understand the mood of the times dictates the response to the events, not as much the events themselves. I mean, the events are important. I mean, so, China shuts off the Taiwan Strait. That'd be a disaster in any era where 40% of the global trade goes through that, small part of the South China Sea. But the chances of that actually even happening during a non-fourth turning period are pretty minimal. The chances of Japan bombing Pearl Harbor because of lack of oil and all of that stuff would have been less prevalent in a non-fourth turning time and would have happened in different ways. So I think that's the most, and that's the reason, again, we do this based on the mood of the times, not just a specific analysis of avoid this event and you'll avoid the fourth turning. It doesn't happen that way.
I don't think it happens that way. So before we started recording, speaking of the mood of the time, you were talking about music and how you've noticed trends in that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, so for me, I get a kind of a time capsule look into the mood of other ages every single day, because the music that I like is the music that I grew up with. 70s, 80s, 90s to a certain extent.
To be clear, is it 1870s or 1970s?
Yeah, well, we'll edit this out in the post-production here. So anyway, to move on, the song that I was listening to on my way into the office today was one from the 80s. You'll probably remember this, Brian. Do 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 da 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 da. It was a song. Do you remember that one? It's by the Police.
I do. It was not my favorite Police song of all time, but I do remember
No,
the song. Yeah.
but I was looking at this and I was thinking about it, and you listen to it, and it's all I want to say to you, and there's certain social commentaries, poets, priests, and politicians have words to thank for their positions, so there's a little bit of social commentary, but the song itself is pretty lighthearted for the 80s. Now the
Yeah.
80s was a time, the 80s were in the third turning space, basically, of the fourth turning cycle.
Second turning, weren't they?
Second, well, let's see. Well, I suppose it depends on the part of the 80s, right? And like 85
Yeah.
to 2005 is it's
Yeah. That'd be the third turning. Early 80s was second turning. Late 80s was third turning for
third
sure.
turning.
Yeah.
So between second and third turning timeframes. So in that time frame, things were more lighthearted than they were today, even though there was commentary. That song was interesting too because it's on one side, it's very lighthearted. So the mood of that era was more lighthearted. Now, people in the 80s were looking more towards selfish pursuits and the building their career. The self-help industry was rocketing, at that time, In Search of Excellence, Tom Peters, all those things. Whereas you compare it, but there was still some social commentary in that song, but not like it is today. So you compare the songs of today are I mean, most of the songs of that day were about relationships and things, like boy girl stuff, a lot of that kind of thing. The songs of today have most of them have explicit warnings on them because they're swearing in the songs.
Yep.
The vast, when the songs of the 80s came out, and they were filled with innuendos. They were all filled with innuendos. The Cars song, Tonight She Comes, she's coming over to my house. Okay, well, maybe that's what it means.
Yeah.
Or Lorelei from Styx, tonight she's moving in, ooh, well, that's kind of slanderous. You're gonna live together, But
Yeah.
today it's like, how many people are you living with? I mean, who knows? But the songs of today also are filled with all this deep mental anguish. I think I mentioned this in one cast in the past where there's a singer talking about, well, you can say all this stuff about how I'm mentally deranged and how I'm an awful person, but I say this stuff to myself every day, so you're not telling me anything new. I mean, if those lyrics were popular during the or if that lyric came up in the 80s, people would have said, what, go to a psychologist. You're insane. What are you talking about? But that's a very, very common refrain across lots of pop. Now, I don't get to listen to a lot of popular music. I hear it when my kids play it for me. I'm like, dude, maybe I'm just getting old because every old person hates young person music. If you're in the, if you're in the 1920s, your parents that were born in the 1840s thought this jazz music that was happening, that's the Satan spawn music. It should have been classical music or whatever. But so it happens in every year. But then you go back even further from the 80s to like the 50s or 60s, some of the popular songs were "How Much Is That Doggy in the Window?"
Right.
The only place you're going to hear, was that Patty Page? I think it might have been. I don't remember. Anyway, that was even before my time. Or the 60s. Look at the sort of the Enlightenment awakening era of the 60s and the songs, the Beach Boys, I'm Picking Up Good Vibrations, or, all of these just kind of innocent, sweet, happy songs that reflected a mood of the day. Not, it wasn't like everything's perfect, but they reflected the mood of the day and what people are thinking about. I'm thinking about she's real fine, my 409. I'm thinking about I'm a boy. I'm thinking about my car. I'm thinking about a cute girl. I'm thinking about a cheerleader. I'm not thinking about how much Xanax my prescription gives me.
But what year did 409 come out? Probably 60.
65.
I don't know. 65 somewhere. Okay. So
Yeah.
all the big issues have been settled, right?
Yeah.
So I pulled it up. The first turning was 46 through 64.
Okay.
Second turning 64 through 84.
Yeah.
Third turning 84 to 2008. Fourth turning 2008 to, they're projecting 2030, 2033, somewhere in there. So when 409 came out, there was no big societal things to worry about because everything had kind of been settled. Now, fast forward to, I don't know, 68, 69, somewhere in there, where Joan Baez is singing her kinds of songs.
Right.
Well, now we're in the the spiritual awakening,
right,
and now we've got the institutions in place, but now we got to fix our spiritual stuff, right? So late 60s, MLK getting assassinated, RFK,
yep,
all those, those things in late 60s kind of kicked off the the third turning, where now we got problems again, and a lot of the music was about that. But in the 80s, and I kind of look at the Pendulum book more as if relates to like music and stuff like that, because
yes,
they talk about going from the me to the we extreme of the
yes,
pendulum.
exactly.
Well, the 80s was very much a we decade, or a
Yeah,
me
me
decade. It was,
decade.
Wall Street movie, the movie Wall Street. And,
Reed is good.
I always joked about like 84 is when Michael Jackson did the moonwalk, like the only dance you could do by yourself.
Right,
It's
exactly.
very much look at me, and breakdancing was all about look at me and all
Yeah,
that kind of stuff. And, the other end of the spectrum where we're at now, and then back in the 60s, whatever, is more about the we stuff. You know what
yeah.
I'm saying?
Well,
So
yeah, I look at songs, so I listen to stuff. I wasn't listening to much music that my mom didn't share with me in the '60s because I was a little kid. But so it was Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass and everything. Surprising to me always how these people are still alive. Like Keith Richards, how is he still alive? Anyway, not another story altogether. That's
clean living, man.
I exactly live it. There you go. You go with that hypothesis. But I listened to some of those songs from that period where we were transitioning in like the late '60s, like the hippies and the Flower Children. The one of the ones I like from then is Shambhala by Three Dog Night. Are you on the road to Shambhala? You can tell them by the flowers in their hair. I mean, just this kind of awakening spiritual. I mean, those of us who were conservative Christians spiritually then thought these guys are loon bins, but
Yeah.
flowers in their hair, that doesn't. But it was a spiritual movement. Or look at the other songs that were kind of cultural, non-connected. Jeremiah was a bullfrog, joy to the world, right? Jeremiah was a bullfrog, was a good friend of mine. So
Yeah.
those things in that day would be shunned and looked down upon. Like, how can you listen to such trite nonsense? But it reflected the times that they were in. So when you see the music of the day turn coarse and turn harsh and turn into hopelessness. A lot of the music of today is hopelessness. It's just expressing, it's trying to get the hopelessness out of the individual and
Yeah.
spoken out loud. So maybe I can find others that relate to, all the drugs I have to take to maintain myself from bipolar disorder or whatever somebody.
Well, and we start off this episode talking about the inaffordability of housing.
Yeah.
And you specifically said it removes hope.
Yes.
Like these things are all connected.
If they are, they all remove. They're all either a reflection of the hope that's being removed, or in the problem. I think with the hopelessness piece is when we look behind us and say everything that humans can try, we have tried. And still, we have not achieved utopia. Still, we have not even achieved the promise of winning World War II. I mean, we've made lots of progress. We've done all sorts of amazing things, but human beings are essentially half glass, half full entities. I mean, we're going to look first, especially with lack of knowledge. When we look at the future, we can look at the past and say, yeah, World War II, we conquered Pearl, we conquered the two great evil empires, and all this stuff. And but that's our perspective now, looking backwards. They were looking forwards and thinking, are we going to even, do I need to learn German? Do I need to learn Japanese? I mean,
Right.
our fleet was destroyed. We don't have, the capacity to fight back right now. How is all this going to work? So going forward from here, when people look from here to the future, we take what we experience now and we project. We say, okay, well, this is the way it is now. Things have been generally unwinding for the last, almost 80 years now, from this great high. So all we can see is a downward path. Generally, all the people can see is a downward path. And so reacting to that downward path is what brings us to this mood that we're in the place we're in. Now, as I look at it, and one of I think the benefits of understanding the fourth turning, to understand the turnings, to understand the general societal cycles, is to understand that even if you're on a downward path, chances are, if you survive the downward path, there's going to be an upward path. There's going to be a recovery. There's always been a recovery. Now, people start letting nukes fly willy-nilly across the planet. Maybe this time there'll be no recovery. I don't happen to believe that, but so you can see how people in society in general would despair and would lose hope in this time. And you can also see then the benefit of understanding that all this has happened before and it's happening now and it's all going to happen again. So that's one of the things that about this understanding of history that really appeals to me, is that it does provide hope in a dark place. I mean, I think there's also spiritual hope beyond that, but just if you just take it on the most base societal level, to me, that's one of the benefits of understanding the turnings and the pendulum and the seasons of societies that have gone back thousands of years.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to hearing the 409 version of the flying Tesla or the quadcopter or the quad cycle or whatever that's going to be. I'm looking forward to it, and that's what we can be excited about, and not the despair and loneliness and hopelessness. And like you're talking, like if you're a young person, like we were talking about the housing stuff earlier, but if you're a young person, you can't rely on institutions.
Right.
You can't rely on accumulating wealth at this point. Like it's not even if you were in the tech industry, like back up 3, 4, 5 years ago when the joke was, for the coal miners who lost their job, the snarky saying was learn to code.
Right.
Well, those coders are being replaced by AI at a pace already that is unbelievable. It's only going to get worse. So you had your hopes put on learning to code and learning these things or learning these crafts or trades or, technical skills that would advance you monetarily. Well, I imagine that the average 22-year-old is much more aware of how negatively AI is going to affect their world than I am.
Sure.
Right. And I can see that these things that the economic thing is gone.
Yep.
And if if you've gone to school recently, like you probably heard a fair amount of the American dream is bad.
Yeah.
And all these wars we fought, all these people who died, and all these beliefs we had were bad, and like that we're heading on the wrong path. But they can't quite say what the good path is. All they can say is what the supposed bad path was. They can't quite can't quite come out and say communism is good or socialism is good. Like they can't quite do that, because that would cause uproar in the community that they're in, wherever, in most communities, not all. So all we know is everything is not working. And so what could you have but hopelessness, loneliness, feeling like the world is set up for a different person's benefit, not mine.
Yeah.
I think that is it will be interesting to watch how the music stuff plays out. The other thing I think about with the fourth turning is one thing that I don't remember if it was pendulum or fourth turning, but they talk about a new type of music. So a new genre of music is born in the first turning. So rock and roll was born in the 50s after World War II.
Yep.
And if you think about it, how much music is listened to pre 1945, 1949, in that range?
Right.
I mean, you've got classical music. Mozart, I'm looking, was alive 1756 to 1791.
Right.
Beethoven was alive 1770 to 1827. Okay, so whatever turning those were in doesn't really matter. But that style of music is by and large the only genre of music that's carried forward past the last fourth turning.
Yeah.
Right. You could argue that, early blues, early country, early folk, like those kind of 1910s, 1920s, some of that carried over and informed how rock and roll evolved.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, rock and roll is very heavily influenced by blues. Country, very heavily influenced by blues. But, Hank Williams hit the scene in 1949.
Yeah.
There was the Carter family in the 1920s, 1930s, but nobody listens to the Carter family today. They just don't. Barely people listen to Hank Williams. So any genre you pick, there's not a lot of people listening to stuff pre World War II. There's exceptions. I mean, I listen to blues from the early 1920s because I like the blues. So jazz, there's some of that stuff, but nobody's listening to something that came out in 1870.
Right.
Nobody's listening to anything that came out in 1895. It's just not a thing. So I'm fascinated to see what the new genre of music that's going to be the rock and roll of the next
Yeah.
First Turning. I'm kind of curious. I don't know if I'm going to love it based on the kinds of music that came out in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
They would have to do something radically different than what they've done for me to like it, and I'm not supposed to like it. That's okay. But
Right. It's
I'm
generational.
really interested in like what that genre of music is. It's going to take the next generation by storm and ingratiate them to each other, and like what's going to get them to convene in dance halls or whatever that's going to look like in 20 years or whatever.
Well, you would think that, so there's themes. It's easy enough to pick apart the themes of the lyrics, because those are more simple, I think, to define than like musical styles and
Yeah.
and this type of thing, in terms of whether it's hopeful or whether it's downbeat. I mean, the the things that come out of in the first turnings tend to be, I think, from at least as I can see it, tend to be more upbeat, tend to be more hopeful. They tend to be more.
They're about fun. They're about
Yeah.
love, like romance. You romance for young
Yep.
people. Yeah.
Yeah, some aspiration. I want the doggy in the window. How much is it? I mean, so just fun things. So you would think then that the first turning of the late 2030s, and for 20 years or so after that, or early 2030s, and after that, after the crisis is dealt with, you would think that it would be again more upbeat, more aspirational. I mean, for me, I'm counting on a return to disco.
Disco. I did not see that coming. Okay. I did not expect you to say that.
Looking for a return to disco. That's very. I mean, come on. The things that were classic in 1979. Freak Out. That was great. Freak Out. Or
Car Wash. I mean, yeah.
Car Wash. Yeah. I mean, you
Who
get a
doesn't want
hard
Car Wash
job.
2.0?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe, yeah, it'll be Flying Tesla Wash. Because I mean, like Car Wash, it's a perfect example. What a fun song. The boss don't mind sometimes if you act a fool. I mean, so and they're talking about
No, the
washing
lyrics of that. That's
cars
awesome.
on a hot summer day. I mean, how cool is that? Or take a look at. I mean, take a look at of a lot of the songs of that era. Dancing Queen, by
Yeah.
ABBA, or
Anything by Donna Summer.
anything by Donna Summer. Well, in you like Moonlight Feels Right by Starbuck. I don't know if you remember that one or not. You probably
I
don't
don't remember that one.
that's a little bit prior to your.
That's a deep cut disco. I'm
Well,
not that into disco.
that one was more like a pop song by a
Okay.
group called
All right.
Starbuck, but it was fun. It was it was aspiration. So all of those songs from that day, and so like even in your youthful period of time, you're younger than me, but even in your youthful time, a lot of the songs, at least, were more fun and aspirational. So the things that set our path and our mentality and who we are today were based on a foundation, a musical foundation, and even entertainment. I mean, look, Gremlins, right? That was kind of it was dark. They killed people, but it was also fun. These Mogwai and the cute little things, or all the things that happened back then. E.T. The E.T. was a cute little guy, or what, Close Encounters of the Third. All of these different movies of those times set the attitude that you and I have now, that is not this depressed attitude that a lot of people that grew up, born like in the later times that from the 2000s on, when we survived Y2K, that their attitude was formed by that sort of because music is emotion. It's pure emotion.
Yeah.
And so that set the tone for them today, just like our upbringing set the tone for how we view things today.
Yeah, I think that music oscillates on a faster, like more of a heartbeat, and also has this overarching thing, right? So like if you look at the 50s, That'll Be the Day, and very fun.
Yeah.
Bill what's his name? Bill Haley.
Yeah.
Like
Rock Around
very,
the
very
Clock.
fun. And then towards the late 60s, it got a little more melancholy, a little more serious, more folksy, Joan Baez, Jimi Hendrix, and all that kind of stuff. And then we kind of got into the era where like pretty much it was all about sex and drugs.
Yeah. Exactly.
Through the 70s, and kind of hit a zenith with disco.
Oh, yeah.
And the pop stuff, like the Car Wash stuff, just very kind of frivolous and like just again more fun and drugs.
Yep.
And then evolved even further into like the hair band of the 80s, like
outlandish,
the Motley Crues and the Poisons and then all that kind of stuff. And then
Sister.
and then grunge comes along. It's very melancholy again for a period of time. And meanwhile, rap is making it's doing its thing. And then hip hop becomes more mainstream, and it's very biting at sometimes, talking about real social issues, in the 90s and 80s and stuff like that. And the pop stuff got a little more silly again. You had the Justin Bieber stuff going on and all that kind of stuff. And I, honestly, I've kind of lost track of the mood of things after that, because I don't tend to listen to a lot of stuff that came out in 2012.
Yeah.
But my point is, the music kind of oscillates between melancholy and fun, kind of like maybe a 7 to 10 year cycle. Like we go from disco to hair bands to grunge. Like it.
Right.
Well, and before the disco, there was like the, sex and drugs era of the 70s. Before that was the very melancholy Joan Baez kind of era. Right. Jimi Hendrix talking about very heavy social issues. And so we don't talk about social issues again until like the 80s and 90s. Like there's a 20-year period there in between. It's like very silly, fun. There's exceptions, of course, but so I feel like it kind of ping pongs back and forth in a shorter cycle, but the overall trend of the 80-year cycle, in the beginning, that's why I think it's more like the pendulum thing. In the beginning, it's more, social stuff. We broke out of this. Hey, good times are here again.
Right.
And then we are all having good times. The we era to the 80s, the me era, the again, the Michael Jackson, the fun stuff of the hair bands and things like that. And then now we're back into a much more of a kind of we have to be in this together, and I feel so lonely, which means I need to find a group to be a part of, and all like it kind of has that overarching theme to me, but also the quicker turn oscillation between frivolity and like seriousness. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that when you get to, if you look at like the 1920s and 30s, especially the Roaring 20s, right?
Yeah,
it was a very
the ragtime era. Yeah,
ragtime. It was to a great extent a narcissistic time. It was a time when and because again, everything we're supposed to be Reconstruction that happened after the Civil War, and better or worse, so you get to a point in a fourth turning, immediately before fourth turning, when everything turns narcissistic. To not everything, but a great deal of it turns narcissistic, and even the turn now, I see the parallel between the 1920s and our era right now, because the Roaring 20s were a very narcissistic time. Now we're in that same kind of narcissistic time. It's about me and my group, and screw you and your group, and it's a narcissistic time on an individual level, because it's like, woe is me, and everything is wrong in my life, and it just, so all of that pattern, the 1920s music and our 2020s music is different, but it still follows the same pattern. And so that's what Kenny G can look for in the future, when the music turns away from what Kenny G liked and was grew up on.
I would also say, like, the parallels that I see in the Roaring 20s versus us is a couple things stand out to me. One is how much we medicate ourselves.
Oh yeah.
Now, back then it was much more alcohol. There was certainly
opium.
There was opium and heroin. There was those things, but it was primarily alcohol. But you can't find a movie made about the 1920s where the gal dressed with the bob, what they called the bob haircut, I think is what it called. Where she doesn't have a drink in her hand, and he doesn't have a drink in his hand, and they're all smoking.
They're all smoking.
Like, I mean, it's the self-medicating was pretty prevalent.
Yeah,
and I think self-medicating now is pretty prevalent.
Very much. Yeah.
The other thing, and I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but I think I'm willing to risk it, or willing to suffer the consequences. In the 1920s, women, the glamorous look was to be very thin, essentially look like a 12-year-old boy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And so, okay, well, what a 12-year-old boy does not look like a woman, like the 1950s Playboy pinup, like a very different look. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, so they made women not look as much like women to be fabulous or beautiful or whatever. Right. The desired look was not the curvy woman of the 1950s. Right. The desired look for women today is not the curvy woman of the 1950s. It's on the other extreme.
Right.
It's Lizzo is beautiful and all these things. Now, it's not the same. It's the polar opposite it was in the 1920s, but still, it's desirable for women to not look like women, as you and I would think about a traditional what a woman looks like, right?
Yeah.
And so how it is manifesting is different, but I think that underlying behavior is the same. I think it's important to note that at the peak of that, women look like 12-year-old boys then, and now the desired look is the opposite of that.
The opposite, yeah.
But it's still not a healthy woman. Neither extreme is like a healthy woman, is what I'm getting at. And I think that's an interesting, I don't know if it's coincidence, I don't know if it's happenstance, I don't know, but it certainly stands out to me as something that's very notable.
I think, I mean, now I'm just pulling out of the history out of the back of my head, but I think that was this case in previous fourth trainings too, because the styles, you think about the styles around the Revolutionary War and what women wore then, or the styles in the South during the Civil War and what women wore then. Again, very much, built up and fabricated and
altered
altered significantly. And so there is, I think that pattern again, and who knows how it'll come to pass the next
it'll be robotic for sure, the next one.
Yeah, probably so. It would be interesting.
It'll be the cool thing will be to tattoo your skin so it looks like steel. What's the steel the silverish looking, they call it some kind of stainless steel, like a robot.
Yeah.
The cool look would be to tattoo your skin so it looks like stainless steel.
Yeah, and it'll be something different than what they grew up with, because we want to be different. And so, but again, I think one of the points of us doing this podcast is to point out these patterns so that in the future folks can understand, that this is normal. It sucks, but it's normal. And two, if you're going to maintain hope through it, assuming as a species we don't kill ourselves, then the next season will be much better. So
and the only reason it stands out to me is like if you look at not a tuxedo, but a suit, not a 3-piece suit, just a regular suit, jacket, tie, pants, matching suit for a man today versus 1920. There's a little bit of difference. The tie might be thinner, it might be shorter, it might be longer, it might be fatter, whatever.
Right.
The pattern, that's different, but essentially it's the same. Right. If you look at it in 1855, again, a little different, but essentially it's the core of it is the same.
Yeah.
If you look back the one before that, again, they were more blousy. The shirts were more blousy and things like that. But the core, the jackets were a little different, but the core of it is the same. It's not the case for women in what the quote unquote desired, what the glamorous in vogue look is.
Yeah.
I just find that really fascinating that the for the men, it stays pretty consistent, but for the women, it's always trying to make women not women, in my opinion. You know what I'm saying? Like, whatever the extreme.
Interesting. I hadn't really thought about that before, but that's a good point, because I think it
I know I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but it's just, maybe it's just my dim-witted view on life, and I'm it isn't there.
You're right about the changes to how drastic the changes have been for women. Now, I mean, I suppose it's possible that women express their feelings more in how they dress than maybe men do. I
don't have any hypothesis on why it is. It's just notable to me that in the 1920s, right before the crisis era, then women, the desired look was to not look like a natural woman, and now the desired look is to not look like a natural woman. They're very different how they manifest, but both cases are the same, in my opinion. So
exactly.
Anyhow, so Kenny G can look out for the Tin Man version of the woman, because that'll be the AI bot that is in style or something like that. I don't know what that'll look like then, but I am fascinated to see what the new I am genuinely intrigued as what the new music is going to be. That's where I got us off track, but that was what we were talking about earlier. Is the new genre of music. I am really fascinated to see what that's going to sound like. I'm kind of excited for it.
I just hope it's
I won't like it, but
I just hope there's a good beat. That's all. I know, I just hope there's a good beat. That's all. I'll be happy.
And I hope it's not like just because we'll be in the world of robots and AI. I hope it's not just like techno. Like let's be more original than that. Let's not do the synthesizers and techno beat. I hope it's something more original than that.
Well, it wouldn't surprise me if you and I become like Bill and Ted. So it could be that this very podcast, Brian, this could be the podcast that sends Rufus back in time to capture us, take us forward to the future, and be revered as social icons like Bill and Ted were in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. It could happen.
Well, anything's possible. I can have a gold mine under my house and not know. Anything's possible. Like all kinds of things could be.
That's my happy thought for the day.
All right. Well, as Dave said in the beginning, we're trying to explain to future generations what this moment in time is like, not on things they're going to see in their history book, but kind of what's the mood and what are trends we notice and things like that. If you think we said something right that you'd like to interject on, we'd love to hear your point of view. If you think something we're completely wrong about, and I gave you ample things about that to interject your opinion on, we'd love to hear that too. Like we're trying to explain to future generations what this moment's like, and we can't do that from our just two little points of view. We'd love to hear your input. You can do that at unsilentpodcast.com. Rumble has a great comment section. And until next time, this is Dave and Brian signing off.
See you next week.
Do you want to be unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.